I think it's important to realize how deeply and how many layers of ideas have been built demonically in the minds of women to cause them to think that this is a great idea. Like, I need abortion in my life.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Ideas Have Consequences, the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. Here on this show, we examine how our mission as Christians is to not only spread the gospel around the world to all the nations, but our mission also includes to be the hands and feet of God to transform the nations, to increasingly reflect the truth, goodness, and beauty of God's kingdom. Tragically, the church has largely neglected this second part of her mission, and today, most Christians have little influence on their surrounding cultures. Join us on this podcast as we rediscover what it means for each of us to disciple the nations and to create Christ-honoring cultures that reflect the character of the living God.
Well, welcome again to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences. This is the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. I'm Scott Allen. I'm the president of the DNA, and I'm joined today by Luke Allen and Dwight Vogt, and we're honored and blessed today to have as our guest Naomi Smith. You've heard, if you listen to our podcast regularly, you've heard Naomi before. It's great to have you back, Naomi.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you back. Naomi is a really dear friend of the DNA for many years now. She's what we call a kingdomizer. She's living out biblical truth in profound ways, especially in the home and with her children and husband, and doing amazing things. She's also been helping us in recent months with a lot of our writing, and so it's been just great really to have you really on the team in many ways, Naomi. So anyways, we are going to talk today, and this is partly why we wanted to have Naomi on, because she thinks deeply about a lot of these topics. We're going to talk about well, I think the way to get into our discussion today is just by putting on the table the topic of abortion. It's something that we've talked about a number of times, in recent months. We've had a number of guests on from pro-life advocacy organizations. And we still, I think where we are at today, at least in the United States, is in this place, this kind of strange place where the goal for the pro-life movement for almost my entire life, has been to overturn Roe v. Wade. That was done successfully by God's grace over a year ago. And yet since that time, there's just been kind of one disappointment after another. The issue of abortion goes back to the states, and state after state essentially are choosing to enshrine in their state laws the equivalent of Roe v. Wade or some version of it. They want to keep abortion accessible, legal. Not all states, but a lot of states, and a lot of states that have been kind of surprising, we would think of as more conservative. And even this last week, guys, we heard news that the United States Supreme Court did not, I can't remember the framing of it, but it had to do with the abortion pill and outlawing that. They refused to do that based on standing, I believe it was. So yet another disappointment on the abortion front. So we're facing, just kind of setback after setback. And I think what's coming clearer now is that abortion is an issue that, is not disconnected from this a lot of other issues. And in fact, it's a natural consequence, I would say. This is Ideas Have Consequences. It's a natural consequence or fruit of a whole lot of ideas, deep ideas and lies that have been really deeply ingrained into our culture now for over 100 years, around the sexual revolution, around issues of marriage and sex and procreation and family and children and human dignity, and all of these issues have been just so deeply, deeply redefined, and so many lies around those issues have been sewn into the culture. Because of that, you have abortion. Abortion is essentially a consequence. So it seems to me to make a difference, we have to change the culture around these, this set of ideas, that revolve around these really basic things that God built into creation right at the beginning, right in Genesis chapter 1. Guys, help me out as I set this up, because I think that's where we want to go. We've got to see some change. We've got to roll back essentially a lot of the sexual revolution, as hard as that or as impossible as that might seem, or else you're not going to make much of a difference on abortion, because it's going to be an inevitable consequence of these ideas. Is that do you think that's a fair statement? What are your thoughts?
I was the one that broached the subject, and I think I realized it was happening, but was just alarmed. Before this podcast, we talked about the changes in our society and just how abortion has become so politicized. And I'm thinking, because the election season is upon us, and you turn on the TV or even watching videos on YouTube, and I get all these ads from people saying, I am going to make, young women running for Congress saying, I'm going to make abortion freedom, for everybody, and we're going to keep it. We're going to have abortion to the last day, before birth, and there's going to be no restrictions. And these are young women with husbands and a child in tow, and I'm just like, wow, what have we come to that it's just become the absolute right and almost divine right, so it's alarming for me. And I'm thinking, this is the culture. I'm looking at the culture. I'm not looking at politics now. I'm looking at the culture and going, whoa, we're really in trouble.
Yeah. Recently, I was struck by, speaking of the culture, a guy that I listened to, Matt Fradd. I know, Naomi, you like him as well.
I do.
He was just explaining how our culture has recently taken a lot of words. He called them ugly words, and we've put nice little labels on them to normalize things that should be ugly. And just reading through the list, I was struck by how much these words have changed people's perceptions. And like, for example, sleeping together or having a hookup, very casual sounding words that used to be called fornication. So we took that word and we threw a nice little label on it. Or you can say cheating, when we used to call it adultery, or gay, which used to mean happy, is taking the place of sodomy, or what we used to call sodomy. Gender affirming care is actually genital mutilation, or reproductive freedom is just a different way of saying abortion. And we're trying to reframe the language around this to normalize it, and it's working. I mean, you watch most movies, most shows out there that have come out since the 90s or 80s, and they're all about expressive individualism, essentially. Just do whatever you want as long as it makes you happy. That message is pushed down our throats nonstop. And when you live that out, when you walk that message out, it's going to lead to exactly what our culture sees today, and just all the sexual libertinism that is wreaking a ton of havoc. Upstream, changing the words, saying expressive individualism to kids and preaching that, and just do whatever you want and be happy. That all kind of sounds benign and fine and happy, but then the result of that is abortion. That's what it often leads to, and the consequence of that's a culture of death.
And Luke, why don't you've got some, just before you jump in, Naomi, let's just set the table here a little bit with that. That culture of death, Luke. You've got some stats, and I think it's always good to just remind ourselves of what we're talking about here, just how dark, and we're talking about genocide levels of murder. This is not some small social issue.
Yeah, this is going to be an issue that 200 years down the road, when kids are reading history books, they're going to be shocked by, I would assume, I would hope, because it's unbelievably evil. 1973 was the year Roe v. Wade was passed. Since then, in the U.S., there have been 63,459,781 abortions in the U.S. alone. As we know, we have a global audience here on the podcast. Abortion has spread, and it's available in many places around the globe, and a lot of the reason for that is because of the U.S.'s influence in other countries. So it's not just a U.S. problem, but the numbers I have here are from the U.S. That giant number equates to about 2,800 abortions a day, which comes out to one child killed in a Planned Parenthood center every 90 seconds, which means if this podcast lasts 1 hour, then that's going to be 40 deaths during this hour of our discussion. So just to break it down to the ground level, that's what we're dealing with in this culture of death. And it hasn't stopped. It hasn't slowed down. Interestingly, after that Dobbs decision 2 years ago, a lot of people were expecting abortion rates to really plummet. They didn't really change much as far as I know. I think it was a year after they actually went up in the U.S. So policies do matter, but they don't change a culture overnight.
That's right.
And there's a deeper lie that is contributing to this culture of death that has not been addressed, and we're trying to get at that today.
I just think it's always important to let those numbers sink in again and just be horrified just anew, at what's happening in the world right now, kind of on our watch, as we say. We'll always look back at these atrocities in human history. We always wonder, how could the church, right? How could they just stand by when this was going on? Well, it's happening right now, and so I just always think it's important when we talk about this issue to put it, to be scandalized and brokenhearted yet again. Naomi, you were about to say something, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the hard part is that it's not like the Holocaust and that 6 million Jews were pushed into trains and put in internment camps with, apart from, against their will. Mm-hmm. It's women who have been trained to think that this is a good idea, that I want this, that I even deserve this. Mm-hmm. And so I have a lot of compassion for the women who think that this is a great idea for them, that they really think that this is like my saving grace, abortion is. And I have a story of a woman, Austin, my husband and I, we lived in Kansas City, and we worked with inner city kids for a while. And I had this one girl who taught me so much just about love and about just walking with her. But she wanted me to take her to get a depot shot, which is like a birth control shot. Mm. And so while we were in the doctor, I was talking to the doctor, and I was like, is this a good birth control shot? Like that kind of thing. And she's like, oh, it's really good. It can even sometimes prevent women from having kids at all. And I was like, what? I mean, my heart just sank for my friend, right? I'm there with my friend, and she's getting a shot, and this is government sponsored. Mm. And so anyway, I got in the car with her, and I was like, hey, did you hear what she said? Mm. And she's like, well, Naomi, I need it. And I said, well, there's other ways. There's other ways to not get pregnant. It's called don't have sex. And she was like, well, Naomi, I can't do that. And I was like, who told you that? Mm. How in your mind and in your thinking do you think that you are so, in some ways, subject to your own impulses that you can't control yourself and not have sex? Because I know for you, being a single woman who's from a poor family, that getting pregnant would probably be, out of wedlock, would be really hard. And really, it'd be tough. She watched her mom be a single mom. There's like this continual cycle of single moms in her family. And so she's just like trying to avoid that at all costs. But in her mind, like, she did not believe as a human that she could say no and not have sex. And that for me was like a wake up call to like how deep she's been discipled into this kind of Darwinian idea of I'm just an animal and I'm subject to my whims and impulses. Yeah. And so she's taking a shot that could sterilize her. I mean, that's unbelievable to me. But in this conversation, I think it's important to realize how deeply and how many layers of ideas have been built demonically in the minds of women to cause them to think that this is a great idea. Like, I need abortion in my life, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You put your finger right on it, I think, Naomi, when you talked about this lie that she had believed. I mean, we're talking about a real person, and this the essence of it was, I have no say in this matter. There is no agency here. And you're right to say that the source of that lie, goes back 150 years to Charles Darwin. A lot of the source of these lies that we are that are awash in our culture right now go back, that far to the early 1800s and to key thought leaders. And Darwin's contribution to this was essentially to say, more or less, there is no God. We are all evolved. And that changed the understanding of what it means to be a human being, right? We no longer are created by God in his image, with dignity, with worth, and with choice or freedom or agency, Now we're animals, right? And so we look to the animal kingdom. Animals, they just, it's all instinct, and they don't have a say in it, so to speak. And we're no different. And that's been taught now for years, decades in public school. That is the basis of what is taught, in our sex ed curriculum, which comes from Planned Parenthood, So of course the upshot is that she's absorbed that completely, that and that's just one lie. We can go down and it might even be good for us to just touch on some more of these lies that have shaped the kind of the ecosystem of lies, that we find ourselves in now. Again, that make abortion kind of inevitable, right? Unless you get back to these lies, you're not going to really see a change, right? This is where I think, again, you can overturn Roe v. Wade, but if the lies are still capturing people's minds, we still, we're not going to see what we want to see.
Hi friends, I'd like to tell you about our newest free online discipleship training course that we offer here at the Disciple Nations Alliance, called The Grand Design, Rediscovering What It Means to Be Human, both male and female, made in the image of God. Throughout the ages, cultures have pivoted between two understandings of the sexes. Men and women are equal, and therefore they are the same or interchangeable. Or men and women are different, and those differences are harmfully exploited to falsely claim that some people are superior to others. But what if there was another option? What if the true biblical understanding, rooted in the Trinity, provided a foundation and a vision for the sexes? Where unity and equality is possible without uniformity, and where differences and diversity between men and women is celebrated without superiority. In an age where views about men and women have divided the church and culture, the Grand Design course offers an opportunity for everyone to discover with fresh insights all that it means to be made in the image of God, male and female. To sign up for this free video training course, go to corumdeo.com, or you can learn more on this episode's page, which is linked in the show notes.
I think choice is one lie, which is, Naomi talked about. But I think another one that's growing is the idea that there has to be a perfect baby with a perfect parent in order to be valid. And I was just sharing earlier today with some friends, my daughter's at a Young Life camp for, it's called Capernaum this week, which is for disabled. There's about 100 so campers, and they have downs or they have some kind of, challenging situation in their life. Yet in Sweden, there's fewer of those people because they can test before birth and they can abort those children. And it's the idea that if that child's not perfect, then you're doing yourself a favor and you're doing a child a favor. The child, whatever that is, you're doing it a favor by not letting him be born into this awful, hurtful world. And yet it's also then undermining what it means to be human. And, are you valuable as a person? And so it doesn't stop at, well, I don't have downs, I must be valuable. Well, what if you have this learning challenge? Well, it seems like it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, it is a slippery slope, and you're right. We're entering into a time.
Which one of us is going to be valuable in 20 years?
Right,
none of us.
Right. And, with the advances in this kind of transhuman technologies and the creation of designer babies. I mean, we're really entering into us. But I think the root of that lie, Dwight, is the same. We are animals, let's say. Eugenics is what you're talking about, which is kind of weeding out the weaklings and whatnot. It's really animal husbandry applied to human beings, right? Mm-hmm. We're animals, and we do this with animals. We cull the herd from these weak, ones, so we can have a stronger herd. It's the same mindset. It's the lie that we're animals, that there is no God, that we're evolved, we're no different than the animal kingdom. We are animals. And if you think, if that's your starting point, all of these things are possible. They're not only possible, they're inevitable, I would say. You have to have a different starting point. We're not animals. We are like animals in that we're created by God. Both of us, we and animals, are created by God. But we're different from animals because we are uniquely created in God's image. And you have unique value and dignity. If you don't believe that, then you're going to treat people like animals. Yeah, go ahead, Dwight.
But to be consistent, then I'm an animal and you're an animal, and the answer is survival of the fittest, so I can kill you.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And people that will say no, that there's some kind of ethic against that, or being, they're essentially being in, they're not being consistent with their worldview. That's right. Yeah.
I kill a fly, I don't like it. I just killed it.
Yeah.
I think another lie that I get, especially a lot of my friends who have bigger families get, is this idea that people are consumers and that we're that's all we are. Mm-hmm. As Darrow would put it, we're a stomach. Mm-hmm. What does he say? We're basically a mouth and a stomach.
Mouth and a stomach.
Yeah,
we're a consumer of scarce resources, right? Yeah.
Right. And so, it's better if there's less humans on the earth. It's just better. Mm-hmm. That kind of a thing. Yeah. And, you kind of get this look of disdain when you have more than 2 kids or something like that, Mm-hmm. And I think that's another probably evolution. You guys could tell me, but where that really comes from. But of course, it's not true in that people have creativity and can innovate and can solve problems, and if we look in history, that's just simply not all that humans are. But it's a lie that's going around right now.
You're absolutely right. And yeah, I think the root is the same, Naomi. I think there's so many of these consequences from this lie that, we are not made in God's image, but we're just evolved animals. And I think yet this is another one, because you can see this in the natural world. You can have we've got to cull a herd. If they're destroying the environment, you've got to keep things in kind of balance. And so people apply that very same thought to human beings, right? There's too many of us where the herd needs to be culled, and you literally hear people talking that way, today, and they mean it. I mean, I take them at their word. If they could figure out a way, and they can, of culling the herd, they will. And as you say, some people voluntarily do it because they've bought into the lie. We're not animals, though, and part of what it means to be a human being is that we don't just consume, we create, because God creates. He's the great creator, and we can actually leave this world more prosperous than we found it when we were born. It's an amazing thing, but that never gets factored into this Darwinian lie, because we're just animals. Animals consume. That's what they do,
You keep saying Darwinian lie, and I've heard 2 reputable people, scientists, in the last week say if Darwin was alive today, he would not write Origin of the Species, because they thought he was honest enough in the way he handled the data that he had at his time, back in the 1800s, that today he would have said, I don't have enough data. The supporting data doesn't support me writing Origin of the Species. Does that make sense? Because he said it just falls apart.
That may be true, Dwight, but all I know is what the culture's done with what he's done.
Right. But it's interesting that these 2 guys, they said, he seemed to be honest enough as a scientist, because he did put in that one caveat. He said if if the fossil record doesn't support graduated, development, he goes, my theory is done. It's toast. Well, he had never even explored the possibility that within the cell was DNA and all these molecular mechanisms and machinery. He had no clue what was going on before life even was created in the cell, that it couldn't have evolved, through mutation and random selection, because he just didn't know about it. He couldn't see it. So they were saying, if he probably wouldn't support his own theory, and yet the whole world says Darwinian evolution, because that's a fact.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to think about science actually supporting the idea of intelligent design and creation. It totally makes sense, because it's reality being studied, and God is reality. God made reality. But it's interesting to think about the level of denial that people have to be in now to actually believe that we evolved.
Yeah. And yet, this is a lie that's, again, regardless of what Darwin would or wouldn't have said, it's so deeply spread into the culture in the West.
It's so deep.
And it basically, the upshot of it is there is no God. We're all evolved. We're all matter. We're animals. Essentially, as it relates to this discussion.
It's deep, but it's also getting the roots are getting thinner and thinner.
Agreed.
I agree.
I
do too.
I mean, I heard somebody the other day that says he would say the majority of modern scientists, biology scientists, whatever, would look at Darwin's theory and go, no, that's probably not true.
And I think we have to fight.
But they would believe the modern synthesis. Well, what's the modern synthesis? There's like 100. I'm exaggerating, but there's a bunch of ideas that have been added to Darwin or replaced Darwin. Anyway, I don't know what they are, but they're called the modern synthesis. But none of them hold water either. And so, anyway, it's just interesting that people are struggling because they know Darwin doesn't work anymore, and now they're struggling.
But we're living,
but they haven't given up the lie.
Darrow talks about how culture changes from, you have these intellectual leaders, and their ideas begin to shape culture over long periods of time as they filter down through the arts and into institutions, into the common person. That's where we're at with these Darwinian lies. Now, all of that can change, but it's going to take another, period of time for that to filter down as well. So it's good that people are challenging these Darwinian lies at the, at the scientific and academic level.
For sure.
But we still have to deal with the consequences of the lie that's filtered down over the last 100 years. I think, go ahead, Naomi. Yeah.
In another vein, I think the lie that for women that convinces them that abortion is good is the modern feminist lie, that my value comes from what I do out in the world, how much power I have, how much money I make, and babies are just going to shackle me in a horrible way, and so I want to be free to be all I can be. And I totally bought that lie for a lot of my life. So I have a lot of compassion for those women too.
Where does that one come from, Naomi? How would you trace back the roots on that? Because that's a little different. This is not Darwin here. This is
So I think from what I understand, and you guys please help me, but there was this modern feminist movement that happened in the 70s, 60s and 70s, where there was a book, there were many books that were written, but there was a book called The Feminist Mystique by Betty Friedan, that basically said that the home for women is like a comfortable concentration camp.
Right.
And it painted all of this maternal work that women had done for literally millennia, by the way, as bondage for women. And so the lie became that in order for women to really realize their full potential, they need to strive to be like men in the workplace and in the marketplace. Yeah. And I think also there was a lot of pressure there because of maybe some, like Dara was talking about this even in Korea, how there's like this big boom economically. And so there's lots of pressure for women to move into the workforce. And if not corrected, then it will lead to a population winter, or people not wanting to have babies because they're fully convinced of this lie that particularly women, that they will fulfill their full destiny really by being out in the marketplace and in essence trying to be like men and deny the fact that God made them as life givers.
Yes. And yeah, there's a feminist root to it, and there's probably an economic root to it as well, right? We can earn money, and babies cost money. It's kind of that simple economic type of calculation.
Sure.
I'd rather be earning money, but it's much deeper than economics, because I think, it's value. You're valued in the workplace, and you have friends, and there's this whole, incentive structure around that. I would put another one too, if I could, just on the table, and that's, we haven't talked about Freud and just all that he did to this discussion as well. All of the problems essentially in the world, all of all of the brokenness that we face at some level, according to Freud, can be, rooted in the fact that we haven't given free rein to our sexual impulses, right? So if just kind of unencumbered sex is going to be the key to this happy, flourishing, healthy life, So he added a whole contribution, in addition to Darwin and the feminist movement, and to this whole discussion. All of these lies have been they've created a fabric, right? That people have, that people live in, they've put on. Very much dominate the culture. And again, abortion is the consequence when you add these things together, right?
Yeah.
I want to move on to kind of, I think it's really important, as we've talked about the lies, to go back to the truth on these things too, and just lay that out. Because I really think that, that's what's got to be recovered, right? We've got to recover truth about a variety of things that are all very closely related in Genesis chapter 1.
Yeah.
Before we do, any further thoughts on just this set of lies that have really shaped the culture and have led to those horrific numbers that Luke was talking about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, one quick thought. We keep pointing back to, Freud, Darwin, sexual revolution, modern feminism. And yes, I think we are living in the consequences of a lot of the ideas that came directly from those, but it's not like these ideas that these guys presented were new in any way. These ideas have been true throughout all of history, because sexual urges are very strong urges. It's one that we should have dominance over. But throughout history, people have always been looking for a way to live out those sexual urges without having boundaries put on them. They just want to live it out freely. But the problem with that was the natural consequence of that throughout all of history up until very recently was if you live out sexual license or libertinism, you're going to have the consequence of babies that come from that, which is an amazing consequence that God generously gave us. But a lot of people don't like that because they just want to keep living free and not be, burdened, as some people would say, with children. I think back to the Roman Empire. They were very sexual libertine people at that time, and they tried to find workarounds. But their workaround was mostly just infanticide, and they just keep living out their hedonism, as did a lot of empires throughout the world history.
It's kind of pagan sexuality. That's right.
Yeah.
Just give in to those urges. Yeah, and if you got the power and you can kind of coerce, if you're a male, anyways, and you can coerce these females, you'll do it. So right.
Yeah, so that was normal throughout all of history. But like you just said, Dad, it was pretty much only practiced by those who had a lot of power. So it was very much a class divide. You saw that in Roman empires. You saw that in, the English monarch family throughout history. But then, here comes Margaret Sanger who is essentially just trying to live out the same thing all these guys are doing, this hedonistic sexual desires. And then she invents this pill that can make it easier for people not to have the consequence that they were trying to avoid, not to have the baby. And then we have abortion come along, and now we have the abortion pill. How easy is that? I could literally hop on the internet right now and order an abortion pill to my house, and it would be shipped here in a few days. So now, via technology, sexual hedonism is available for anyone, any class, anywhere in the world. And for the first time in history, we can live out this, fleshly desire with, perfect freedom. So we're in the Wild West of the sexual era right now, and this is new territory throughout history that we consequence-free territory, as some people would say. So yeah, we just have to look at it with different lenses.
It's definitely not consequence-free, though, Lucas. We well know as we were talking.
No.
Yeah.
I was putting air quotes in, but I guess this is audio
but
only.
In terms of in terms of the physical manifestations, whether it's STD or HIV/AIDS, we're pretty much conquering those consequences. But the one that probably never will be conquered is the soul. I mean, what do you do with your heart, your emotions, your personhood?
Yeah.
That one.
There's just it's
maybe there will be some kind of drug we can
said,
conquer that with.
We're just leaving. Go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I'm reading this book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by a woman named Louise Perry, who is not a believer. She's actually, she talks really more from a Darwinian platform, basis. But her whole thing was that she worked at I think it was a sexual violence center, and she started to realize, like, wait, the sexual revolution has really just ruined the lives of a lot of people, and particularly lower class women. And so, like, in her, so in this book, she's kind of making the case that, like, actually monogamy is, lo and behold, the best for just general human thriving and flourishing. Although she's not even a believer, which I find so interesting, and kind of like her foundation isn't really biblical. It's just more statistical and looking at kind of who's really benefited from the sexual revolution and who really hasn't.
Yeah, I've heard that book too, Naomi, and I'm encouraged when non-believers look at, are honest enough to look at just the horrific consequences and say, this isn't working, and so good for her, right? Let's
takes courage.
It does. It does. But it's true. These things are facing us. It's hard to. It's really hard to deny at this point that the sexual revolution, meaning the sum total of all of these lies and that fabric that it's created in our culture, have led to just utter kind of destruction, not just of human lives from abortion, but just broken people, right? I mean, that famous line, you don't break God's law, you just end up breaking yourself against it. If you just broken people, because we just keep bucking God's created order and design. Let's go there now, and I want to just lay that out. I know we know that well, but I don't think that. Here's my contention. I'll put my cards on the table. I think the church has gone along with these lies way too deeply. And if we're going to see a change in the culture around these issues of marriage, sex, procreation, children, human dignity, the truth about human life, it's got to start in the church, right? How can we expect the broader culture to change on these things if we mean the people of God, aren't really knowledgeable and embodying this kind of countercultural way of God, and when it comes to these issues. So really, it's got to start with us, and we've got work to do in the house. And I think that's really what I would like to say on this, is that we've got work to do. But that has to start with just attacking some of these lies with truth, right? And getting back to truth.
How do we do that?
well, let's just put some of these down, and I just think some of the basic building blocks of this. To me, it's this incredibly beautiful mosaic that God, establishes in Genesis chapter 1. It starts with Genesis 1:26 and 27 when he creates us, human beings, in his image, in his likeness, male and female, those two, by the way, with incredible dignity and purpose and worth and the ability to create, the ability to, and then he says, and this is the first job description, be fruitful. Multiply, fill the earth. God wants the world to be full of these people that bear his image. It's these people that bring him glory because they're his image bearers, right? And can create goodness and truth and beauty. So these are very basic things that God's created, and that's why he created the first social institution of marriage, right? Between Adam and Eve in the garden, one man, one woman. Sex is created right then as well. And it's intricately tied to procreation, right? There's no separation as we have today. Those are intricately tied. And all of these things, all of these relationships are so intricately tied, I would say, and woven together in this beautiful ecology. You have, sex, marriage, procreation, human dignity, again, all of these things created by God for a purpose, and for a good purpose, right? These basic institutions. So a lot more to say. What would you guys add to, just building out a little bit more of these basic biblical truths? And you could pick any one of those topics of sex, procreation, family, children, whatever it is. They all fit together.
I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What
I was going to say was I just think that it sounds like, okay, coming from where I came from, from a family that did not believe the Bible. From a family that was pretty resistant to getting into any Christian or Judeo-Christian roots. It sounds like this really nice kind of fairy tale that happened. And it's like, oh, that's nice for you. That's not where I live, that's kind of like, I mean, I'm just trying to think like a person in the real world, that's just not where I live. And I like what you're saying, Scott, but you're so out in La La Land as compared to where I am. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so what I think people need is vision. And the reason that I say that, and they need vision like on boots on the ground vision. And I remember when I first came to Christ, I had a friend who told me all these stories of people who waited on God for the right person. And I had never heard of that before in my entire life. And I was like, people do that? That's crazy. But that sounds actually really amazing that God could orchestrate and bring you into the right marital relationship. It's not like you just sort of get married and have some kids or whatever. And so I decided I'm going to do that because I got the vision for what it was. You know what I mean? And so I think people need vision. They need vision that's real and that it's incarnated, really. I mean, we've lived the vision and we can give it to others. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And they need to have a vision and they need to see the beauty of it. Like you say, it seems like almost too good to be true. And it should. Yeah. It should. God created us male and female. He created marriage.
Yeah.
Two people can come together in this permanent, lifelong, relationship of love and fidelity. And God can work through that, through sex, to bring new human life into existence. And that's the beginning of family and just the goodness of that, of raising children, of having grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of building. I mean, you're building something that's beautiful and lasting. In some ways, it's a legacy. Some of the most important things that you could ever do in your life.
Yeah.
It does sound too good to be true because it's a great gift from God. Now, I get that non-believers that have been just so deeply steeped in these Darwinian, Freudian, Margaret Sanger, you name it, feminist lies, this is going to sound like just not even close to being something that they can wrap their heads around. But it shouldn't be that way for the church.
Sure.
This should be basic discipleship, and we should be challenged to live in this way, and we should have that vision. So again, I'm not right now thinking we've got to convince the unbelieving world, but we've got to start in our own house, right? Do we believe in God? Do we believe in His Word? I think part of the problem for the church is that, we've had, as Darrell often says, there's 4 main chapters to the story, this beautiful story, this transforming story. There's creation, there's fall, redemption, consummation. The church has limited it to 2 chapters, fall and redemption. And, they've left out creation, all that's in Genesis chapter 1. And that's where a lot of this is laid out, so that it's just not of interest to them. Like, that's not something we need to focus much attention on. Well, fine, just talk about people being lost and fallen and they need to be saved. But if you don't have much to say about sex and marriage and family and human dignity, guess what? Freud does, so does Darwin, so does, somebody else is going to tell a different story, and that story is going to come into the church, and that's what's happened, I think. So.
And I think it's sort of like redemption. How far does redemption go? Because it's one thing to say redemption is your soul is redeemed. It's another thing to say that your entire family line is redeemed. Like, and I think about, I love Rahab, the story of Rahab in the Bible. And I think about her, who she was a prostitute, but she believed God, and she believed that He could turn her life. And so she made herself an ally of the Jews, of the people of God, and she was absorbed into the people of God, and she married, a Jew, and her whole line was redeemed as a result. So she was a prostitute, but then her whole line was redeemed because her faith didn't stop with, well, my soul just needs to be redeemed. It was much more than that. It was a whole life. It was a whole legacy, really.
Yeah. She's.
I'm going to jump back a little bit because what you said, Naomi and Scott, a thought for me. Naomi, you were talking about your family background, and mine's the opposite. And I was raised on the fairy tale, and I believed the fairy tale. I mean, I think the Bible was my first pillow. And, and Scott, you talked about Genesis 1:27, made in the image of God. Yeah, I knew that really, really early on. But I think, just reflecting on my own life, I don't think that I grasped how smart God was until I was 30. I hadn't made the connection between science and the complexity of the world and creation and a very highly intelligent God. Somehow that was science, and God was in the Bible, and I know He created it, but I never made the connection just how smart He was and how good He was in His smartness. So, that He can redeem us through redemption, fix things that we've screwed up. I mean, that comes because He's good and He's really, really smart. But I hadn't made that connection. Honestly, I hadn't. I didn't know He was so brilliant. And His brilliance, if you think about, I was watching a video last week about a fly and the wings on a fly and how incredibly it's like you've taken 40 different flying creatures and put them into one thing called a fly and orchestrated its wings so that it can do what it does, so we can't swat it very easily. This scientist that studied him says, I don't even swat flies anymore, not because I don't like them, but because they're so amazing, and I'm thinking, an amazing God makes that, that's one tiny, 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 tiny bit of His creation. And I'm doubting Him. I'm doubting His intelligence. I'm doubting His goodness. How could that be?
Yeah, it's
Unless
been
he didn't do
amazing,
it.
and I think
Just
when
happened.
you look back historically, and where this truth of human sexuality and marriage and family and children, human dignity, where the truth of those things has shaped cultures through the church, or the Judeo-Christian set of ideas. These are Jewish ideas, right? They come from the Bible and Genesis, right? It's been revolutionary, right? Really, Luke alluded to kind of pagan sexuality of the ancient Greek world, right? Where you didn't have strong families, and there was just rampant sexuality. There was essentially infanticide. You name it.
I mean, that's a norm in all cultures throughout history, except for
except ours. Where the fruit, the consequences have been what? Strong families, strong marriages. Of high value on children, high value on women, the protection of innocent human life, these incredibly good consequences that have been really revolutionary. We've lost that in our generation. I think the church has sadly we've reverted back to that fallen pagan kind of norm of sexuality, in a different guise, a la Darwin, Sanger, etc. But we've reverted back to it. So we've got to say, hey, this can change again, right? But it starts in the house of God with the people of God. Recovering the beauty of this vision, the intricacy of it, as you said, Dwight. And it is intricate, right? It connects. It's so connected. Right? Sex is connected to procreation. In the pagan sexuality, they're disconnected through the pill and abortion and whatnot, right? Sex is connected to marriage, right? It's intended for marriage, right? It's not to be practiced anywhere else because of the power that it has to bring about human life. And human lives aren't just animals, or they're image bearers of God with incredible potential, right? So we have to recover the beauty and the intricate interconnectedness of all of these things. And this is something, by the way, that we all can do, right? This is like, Naomi, you're a good example of this. You just said, we're going to do this in my own little realm here of my own life and my own marriage. And we're going to start making some choices here to live faithfully, truthfully, so, it's really applicable, right?
It's very applicable. And I guess the thing that I think I see mostly in Christians that I talk to is that they by and large believe what you're saying, Scott. But the lie that I think is more is an undercurrent that they are maybe not aware of is kind of this idea of the relativism of truth. Well, that's my faith, and I'm choosing to go this way. And as for me and my house, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
But who am I to tell you, what you should do? Like, you need to do you, that kind of a thing. And I don't think that many of the Christians that I talk to really realize how unloving that is.
Yeah.
And uncompassionate that is to just say, you do you, and I'll have my little private world over here sidelined, I think
it's really good for you to put that on the table, Naomi, because I do think that that's true. That's yet another lie. That's this kind of postmodernism lie that truth is all small t. It's what I believe, and you believe something different. I'll respect that, but there is no capital T truth that's out there, right?
Yeah.
No,
and I think we need
this is capital T truth. This is not just true for Christians. It's true for everybody because God is the God of the universe, and this is His universe, capital T.
Right.
Truth.
And so, if we really believe that, then what we would say to someone who does not believe, with as much grace and kindness as we can, is that I'm contending for your best. I want you to line up with reality.
And something that's really good. It's going to be really good. Okay, I mean, we live in a fallen world. There's always, things that can go wrong and bad, but this is good. This is really good. As you said rightly, this is kind of a fairy tale if you really It's C.S. Lewis. That's what he said. This is like a fairy tale that's actually a true fairy tale. It is, because it's so good. It's so, and that should be the appeal to the non-Christians, is that they see something in our lives, in our families, in our children that they go, this is good, like something. Yeah.
But I think we really do I think the majority of Christians believe it but don't know it.
What do you mean by that?
I'm thinking of thinking relativism.
Relatively?
Yeah.
As a relativist. Yeah, relatively. I was wanting to add an ICALY to that. It's the idea that I don't want to impose my beliefs on you because you have your beliefs and I have my beliefs, but we would never do that with gravity. Right. If somebody was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon and we'd say, you have your beliefs. I happen to believe in gravity, but if you don't, that's fine. Good luck.
We don't tend to do that either with issues around banking and money and things like that, right? There's
Yeah.
But so in a sense, we're relativists, with our own faith, because I believe it really strongly, though. Right. But do we really?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking is, I don't know if we really believe that God's way of living is the best way. Sometimes we talk about God's way of living, the biblical worldview, as the handbook for how to live. I don't know if we fully believe that it's the one that actually leads to flourishing, actually leads to joy, actually leads to freedom, the only one that leads to freedom. I don't know if people are convinced of that, and it is hard to convince people of that, because the joy or the thing the world's trying to offer here to, like that high schooler who's pumped up on hormones, is you can just fulfill your sexual hedonism however you want and do whatever you want. And that's pretty appealing even for kids in the church. So I think, like you were saying, Naomi, we have to take this out of the thought world and out of the, read Genesis 127, that's it, right? And then actually live it out, because living it out is beautiful and other people see it and it's contagious. And I know for myself, when I was a teenager, you hear all these things, you're like, okay, cool, I get it. But, I'm hearing other things and I'm confused. But then you see someone who's maybe 10 years ahead of you or 5 years ahead of you, and they're living it out. And it's beautiful. A committed marriage that has children and a place of love and flourishing for those children, it's beautiful. And it's countercultural, and it sticks out, and it's attractive.
Well, and that means that our witness actually has to be real. And that's a lot of work on our part. You know what I'm saying? It's easier to get swept up in a political movement where, I don't have to actually deal with like my marriage. You know what I mean? That's where I think the rubber meets the road. Right. It's like, do you have a marriage, or do you have a family that someone could walk into and be like, that's beautiful. It's real, and it's obviously not perfect, but it's beautiful.
No, that's right. That's right.
It's good enough.
This is really, rubber meets the road kind of stuff for all of us. I mean, these choices that we make about sex and marriage, and I mean, these are basic decisions everybody has to make. And I think at the end of the day, you have to just ask yourself the question, do you believe in God, and do you believe in His Word? And do you love Jesus? Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey, right? You'll obey because you love me, right? This is what our pastor talked about yesterday in his sermon. So you're going to love somebody, and you're going to obey somebody, right? So who is it? And, you have to make some basic decisions about these things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, it is. Yeah, boots on the ground. It's difficult. Mm-hmm. I heard a guy recently say, I think, being pro-life is like Christian virtue signaling. It's easy to say, but and you look good and people applaud you, but living it out's a little more difficult and more complicated. That's right. Yeah. So it's good to dig into how do we actually do this? How do we live it out?
It's one of the most radical things we can do, to live out the truth as best we can in God's strength and grace, with the help of brothers and sisters, to live out the truth of these things, sex, marriage, procreation, family. It's one of the most radical things we can do, one of the most powerful things we can do as well, if we really, if we want to be salt and light in this culture right now and be a light to this world. So
I agree.
yeah.
And I listened to this podcast recently about the early church and how revolutionary they were. And one of the
Yes.
things that they did was take those babies that people were just leaving out to die in the Roman
Mm,
Empire, and they said, "No, give us your babies. We'll take your
mm,
babies."
mm,
And I was just thinking about, well, that's hard.
mm.
I mean, let's like not sugarcoat that. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about, okay, so now I have a friend who got pregnant, and early on, she found out that her baby had Downs. And she could have aborted, but she didn't. And now she's raising a baby with Down syndrome. And like, that's hard.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like mundane. And how is she really changing the world? But she is. Like, that choice that she made and that she makes every day is completely countercultural to what we've talked about in the beginning today of like this having this ideal kind of human and all these things. And it is revolutionary what
Yeah.
she's doing on a day-to-day basis.
And people that make choices to adopt, I mean, these are lifetime choices, and I just applaud that, because these aren't small things. This is a
They're
choice that's
hard. It's hard.
they're hard. But here's the deal, and it's
really
also a complete act of faith, in the sense that I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet if I make this decision. I don't know how this is all going to work out. But I'm going to trust God that he's going to if I, am acting in faith, and that he's going to help. And here's the deal, in my own limited experience with trying to be obedient in some of these things, I've always seen God help. And then what that does is it strengthens your faith, right? You actually have a stronger faith at the end of it, because you see that yeah, these are hard decisions. These are really consequential decisions that require a lot of faith, but your actual faith can grow too as you see God being faithful, in that.
That willingness of Christians to save lives and to put in the years of hard work to protect children's lives is amazing. I think that's one of the ultimate, pro-abortion versus pro-life arguments is, instead of aborting that child, give it to me.
Yeah.
I'll raise them.
Mother Teresa always said that. She always, give those babies to me, And it was amazing, She just like, there can never be enough of them. She saw them like flowers on a hillside. Like, what are you talking about? There can never be too many of them, So, well, yeah, that's it, guys. And I do think that I think back to the beginning of our conversation, the issue of abortion really is a consequence of a whole fabric of lies. So we want to see an end to this abortion regime. You've really, right, you've got to change that entire fabric, as opposed to just going after that one fruit of this tree, this deadly tree. And that seems huge. How in the world do you do that? But again, I'm just kind of paraphrasing our discussion. Well, it has to start with us, actually, on this one. Like, are we making the choices that align with the truth of God? Are we living that out? It's hard. It takes faith. Are we doing it as a church, as a people of God, right? I just think that's really where it has to kind of start. Any final thoughts as we wrap up our discussion on this today? Dwight, I know this is something that you've, in particular wanted to talk about. I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts as we wrap up.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with your summary. I just think that, we trust God is good in his original design and his plan, and we also trust him, as Naomi, you've said, in his redemptive work. And that's the hard part, when things go wrong and things are bad and things are hurting, you wonder, where's God? And you say, no, he's involved in redeeming this situation, and he will, and he does, and he can.
And I think it shows, as important it is to change laws. There's so much talk now about, how do we have a Christian influence on culture, and it revolves around politics and law. And as important as that is, I think the Roe v. Wade should be a reminder of us that that's a pretty weak thing too, right? Just this idea that we can change laws, change, culture. You're not going to change a culture if you change laws. You have to go. You have to do much more, and And it makes it much more personal, right? I can advocate for changing a law. That doesn't really mean anything for me personally.
Right.
But now this is like very personal, right? But this is where it starts. This is where you have to kind of start to change a culture. You have to start at that level of. Now I know some people would disagree with me. Culture changes from the top, from the kind of the elite culture, influencers that are out there, the powerful. And I'm like, yeah, but. I also think it starts with every one of us making some decisions about about these things.
You have to have root truth that you're holding on to, not just the law.
Yeah.
You have to have root truth.
I mean, back again to the early Christians in the Roman Empire. That's what brought the Roman Empire to its knees eventually, was Christians, just a few of them living it out.
Living it out.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful when people see it. It's so good. And this is, again, I'm convinced this is the way we change people's lives and change cultures, that we show them the goodness. Again, back to that idea of that this is almost too good to be true, the goodness of it, so that it appeals to people, their hearts. They want to be a part of it. It's not coerced or compelled in any way. This is like something I want. Well, how are they going to want it? They've got to see it, somehow. They've got to see it, the beauty of it lived out. Yeah. Well, yeah. Go ahead, Luke.
Just as a general principle, it keeps popping into my head, but a lot of these things just don't come easy.
No.
We're always looking for shortcuts. We're always looking for the instant gratification. But beautiful things, the more beautiful it is, the more time and effort it usually takes to create. And usually as just a general principle, we shouldn't be looking for shortcuts or instant gratification as Christians. There's a lot in the Bible that talks about discipline, and a lot that talks about pick up your cross daily and follow me, deny yourself. Just as a general principle, it's always good to be wary when people are offering you the golden carrot and saying, here it is. We need to have more of a long-term vision than that as Christians. And even as young people, back to the young people, they need to embrace that vision of the beauty of family and generations. It's amazing. I'm at the early stages of family life right now, and it's awesome. And it's only going to grow, and it's going to get better. And you can already kind of foresee where God might lead you in the future. And it's such a fun and beautiful ride to go on. And it's absolutely miraculous and beautiful.
Yeah.
We were having an ultrasound 2 weeks ago, my wife and I, and it just struck me when the nurse was looking at our baby and said, "That's beautiful." And I was like, yeah, that is beautiful. That's a new generation on its way, and it's so exciting to see, and everyone recognizes it. It's intrinsic. Human life is beautiful. Loving generations are beautiful. So it's, we're not saying this is an impossible task, because it is self-evident in a way, and we're kind of lying to ourselves when we say that a beautiful family of generations and the grandpa playing with the grandchild isn't beautiful. We all kind of know it is,
Well, and I think in true DNA fashion, I think we have to think through how we can think like 50 years down the line, 150 years down the line. How can we inject ideas? Because I was thinking about the idea, the show Friends, like they just had sex. Everybody had sex, and like there were no consequences. I'm like, that discipled my generation in a way. It was just like kind of like, oh yeah, it's just no big deal, hookup culture, that kind of a thing. And so I think just thinking through how can we use the talents and gifts that we have to perpetuate these ideas, whether it's in our neighborhood or if we're communicators, then we learn how to tell stories or whatever it is, so that we can begin to introduce this good and beautiful reality, I guess, back into our culture.
Yeah. I like what you're saying about She's such a sweetie. If you're just listening, we've got Naomi and her beautiful daughter there sitting on her lap, and so great little object lesson here as we're talking about family. So thanks, Naomi. This is something that it requires. I think the people that have been the drivers of the sexual revolution, it wasn't just there was a lot of thought, a lot of strategy, a lot of desire to see those outcomes that we're seeing right now, as destructive as they are. And I don't think we're going to see the reverse without some same level of, there's got to be, a real desire to see the change, and there's got to be a level of strategy and thinking and care to see that as well, which means people that are involved, like you say, in arts and entertainment, Christians, how do we communicate a different message than the hookup culture that you see on Friends? That's got to be intentional. These things don't just happen by accident, right?
I don't know if you guys ever saw that.
Yeah,
did you
go
guys see
ahead.
that movie Juno? Did you see the movie Juno? Yeah. It came out like a long
Yes,
time
I did.
ago.
Yeah, I do remember that movie. Yeah.
It was about
Abigail,
a girl
what's her name? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that movie portrayed a compassionate view of a girl who got pregnant and didn't know what to do and considered abortion. And then, she was at the abortion clinic, and one of her friends who was protesting abortion said, "Your baby has fingernails." And then it was like she started seeing fingernails everywhere. And, it was like it became real that her baby was real. But I guess what I'm saying is that movie, I feel like, did more for the pro-life movement than a lot of other things, because it was a compassionate story, and it was a real story, like of someone wrestling and someone in real life having to make this choice, this hard choice of life. And she ended up giving her baby up for adoption. But I just think that it's those types of things that really grab people's heart,
Absolutely.
and really begin to like disciple on a heart level. Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
These lives matter.
Yeah. The whole, in the change of culture pyramid that Darrow talks about, you have the intellectuals at the top, but then you have the artists, and because they touch the beauty, they touch the heart. It's it's a whole different way of reaching people, and it's much more powerful. Yeah. Well, guys, it's been a really good discussion. Obviously, a long discussion we're going to continue to have, but I hope that those of you who are listening, like us, are just again reminded of the powerful truths that the Bible has on these things, and that we need to live them out. This basic creational truths from Genesis chapter 1. We need to understand them deeply. We need to make very personal decisions about living them out to the best of our ability with God's grace and strength. And that's, if we are not, how can we expect to see change out there if we can't see it in here, so to speak? So, guys, Luke, Dwight, Naomi, thank you for your really wonderful thoughts. And I always learn so much just being a part of these discussions. And thank you who faithfully listen to this podcast. We're so grateful for every one of you. This is Ideas Have Consequences, the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance.
Thank you for joining us for this episode with our good friend Naomi Smith. As always, to learn more about our guest or find any of the resources that we mentioned during the episode, make sure to head over to the episode page, which is linked in the show notes. And again, on that page, you can learn more as well about the Grand Design, which is a free online video training course. Ideas Have Consequences is brought to you by the Disciple Nations Alliance, which, for those of you who are new, is a ministry that has worked around the world for the last 27 years, training over 1 million Christians in over 90 nations with the transformative power of a biblical worldview. If you'd like to learn more about our ministry, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or on our website, which is disciplenations.org. Thanks again for joining us. Please share this show with a friend or leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening. And we hope you'll be able to join us again here next week on Ideas Have Consequences.